Hi everyone. I'm a little bit late. Ryan is waiting in the background. I'm just going to let him join. I just lost my phone. There we go. Um, so we'll just go straight ahead. Ryan, I'm going to let you on now. Say hello to Ryan, everybody from the True Connoisseur. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine, Pep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone who's watching. Rich Mitch, Joel, and Rachel, Flavor Sauce. Hi guys. Um, So, in case it wasn't obvious on the thumbnail, hey Hannah, we decided we've been wanting to do a live stream for a while, right? Since well, probably since we both got back from Milan and Italy, and the topic we kind of fell landed on was. And obviously, this happens to pretty much everyone. Perfumes that we used to love or like a lot, and no longer did. I don't know how you approach this, Ryan. I know that the list I came up with. I mean, I don't think all of them were loves at any point, but I liked them enough to own bottles of all of them, and have since sort of come out of my collection. Did you approach it in a similar way?
I certainly did. All these fragrances that I've kind of documented so we could talk about them this evening were things that were in my collection. They were things I have publicly recommended at one point or another. So I definitely had real affection for them, but at some point they just stopped doing it for me.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, and obviously anyone watching or who is in the chat, feel free to mention stuff, and then at some point we'll break and I'll highlight comments. Hi Cherie, hi Stefan, Bilbo Fragrance is here as well. All right, so being my guest on the channel, Ryan, I'm happy for you to kick us off. I think we've both come up with about 10 each. Is that right?
That's right. Okay,
Yeah,
then I'll kick it off. These are not in like chronological order; they're in alphabetical
yeah,
order. So
yeah.
they'll be in alphabetical order by house, so you'll kind of see how I go through it. But the first one that is interesting for me is from Acro, Olivier Cresp's house, which I sampled that lineup when it first came out. So when it was just the original, I think six fragrances. They've expanded since, but like the original lineup with like Night and Smoke, and the one that I had for a while and wore a decent amount of and have gotten rid of since, which is Acro Dark, which is his
Ah,
take on dark chocolate. Um, at the time, I was really struck by uh, the sort of intensity of the sort of realism of the dark chocolate at that point in time. I mean, if you spray it, especially on paper, you get like this very interesting sort of woody animalic opening a little bit, where it kind of gets a little interesting and dirty. Um, the problem with it is that I always have a love and hate relationship with gourmand notes. I mean, I have plenty of things in my collection that be pretty sweet, but the problem with Acro Dark for me is that it just at the end just started to dry down to what is kind of like a hazelnutty vanilla
okay.
gourmand, right? So all the interesting stuff about it, all the interesting woody facets, these sort of dark things, um, really just kind of get flattened out of it at the end. And I think as you kind of look at my list, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of fragrances on here that have like one interesting facet or another, but they just kind of don't sustain in the way that I would want them to across the entirety of my experience with the fragrance. And also, it just at a certain point, it just felt like too sweet to be me. I think it would be a lovely fragrance for other people to wear, but it is. It just I didn't feel comfortable in it at a certain point in time.
That, oh, I mean, it's obviously understandable given that that's a topic. But I only got to smell the Acro stuff for the first time when we were in Italy because they've only just started stocking them or selling them retail here, but I hadn't had a chance to sample them up until then. And you know, you can understand what the hype was around that house, but definitely need to kind of be in the mood for something like that. It's and I completely understand the thinking of you being attracted to it initially and then not, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've always loved like I say as a kind of refrain a lot of times in my videos that I don't really like to wear like foodie smells. In the case of dark chocolate, it's a little different because dark chocolate always skews a little earthy and bitter, and I like bitterness in my fragrances quite a bit. And I thought at the time that was the fragrance that really did that for me. Um, I don't know. I actually got lots of compliments on it when I wore it. I don't care about compliments, but
Yeah.
it is the case that like whenever I wore it, I usually would get a positive remark. I found it pretty loud, so that was another reason I didn't I didn't especially love it. I'm not one who like I wear a lot of heavy fragrances, but I don't like necessarily like to advertise it too. So that's
Yeah, yeah.
a factor.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned compliments as well because I just realized that when I was looking at my list that there were a few that actually got me the very rare unsolicited compliment, and I don't know if there's any if that is has anything to do with not liking them anymore, but it's just you know it just points out the fact that they can still be a popular liked perfume, and ultimately you're going to have to want to wear it yourself, and I didn't. All right, so I'll just highlight a couple of people's. That's one I have not tested much at all. Hermes Voyage.
I don't think
Have
I've
you
ever
tried
smelled
that?
it. I don't think I've
Yeah.
ever smelled it, and I've always been curious about it because I'm always game to smell anything Hermes, but it is I've never smelled Voyage.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I might kick off my list, and mine isn't in no particular order. I had to sort of consult my my base notes database, Ryan, and have a look at all the perfumes that I've owned or tested extensively, and sort of run through the list and pick ones that would be good for this live stream. So the one that I'm going to talk about first, because I did own the bottle for quite some time. I maybe had it for a year or two. And back then, when it I guess I'm going to put this down to my nose not being as developed, you know, in my own taste, not in any sort of elitist kind of way. But at that time, I was still very like excited about smelling new things, and I smelled a perfume from the house of, or the brand Costume National, which doesn't really get talked about much these days, even though they have some popular perfumes. And when I first smelled Costume National Soul, I I think my reaction was I was kind of blown away by how unique this smell this smelled to me compared to what I'd already tried. And I guess over time with this perfume, the more I wore it, and then the more I tested a lot of other stuff. So, if anyone's not familiar with it, this is kind of, you know, the two main accords are westernized oud and vanilla, basically. And once I started to try a lot more brands, niche brands, I realized that this kind of combination wasn't that uncommon, and I started to smell a lot more. And for some reason, at some point with this perfume, and it was definitely 100% that it wasn't the actual perfume itself because it didn't change the way it smelled. I tried different bottles in stores, but at some point my brain just decided that there was something in this perfume that smelled off. Like it went from a harmonized mixing of accords to just this really un unbalanced sour thing that was going on, and that wasn't just for Costume National Soul. It was for a lot of stuff that was in that realm. Like there was another perfume that I initially liked, which was Calamat Black. I can't remember who makes that, what brand that was. Maybe someone in the chat can help. But that did the same thing. I was initially blown away by how that smelled, and then over time, my brain decided that this is not a smell that I enjoyed anymore. So, Costume National Soul was a bottle that I owned for a couple of years, and then ended up selling. Yes, Arabian Oud was the brand that made Calamat Black. Thanks, Joel. Have you ever smelled Costume National Soul?
Briefly and a while ago. It's actually been a very long time for me since I have sampled any of the Costume National stuff that Dominique Ropion did. But actually, it's funny you mentioned this one because there's one on my list that kind of aligns with this. It's a little bit adjacent to it. It's another Dominique Ropion
Okay.
popular fragrance, and I might as well just jump ahead and talk about it.
Yeah. Go for it.
Which is Chopard Oud Malaki, which
Yes, I've heard of it.
Yeah. So it's still very nice.
Yeah.
I actually literally just sold my bottle this past week, so it's been on my swap list for a while, but I finally just sold it. It's a really nice fragrance. I still stand by everything I've kind of said positively about it, but I think the problem is it has gotten more and more. I hate to say I don't want to say the word generic because where it's gotten, that profile has gotten popular is not in the mass market perfume. It's not like you go to Sephora and you smell a lot of stuff like Oud Malaki. But what kind of happened is Penhaligon's ripped it off with Halfeti, and then everybody did the Chopard Oud Malaki style. And it's a really nice perfume, but it just felt less and less unique with time. And I hate to say, I think there is something that I have to just be honest about in the way that my journey has gone, which is like, I have really started to gravitate towards more and more quote unquote weird or unusual things the longer I've spent in this hobby. And that's not to say that some of these things that I've drifted away from are bad, but it's just like, I don't know. They just don't interest me for it anyway. And it even like if it might be something that I would find pleasant to smell. Like again, if somebody was wearing Chopard Oud Malaki and I walked down the street, I was like, that's a very nice smell to me. I think it's nice. It's got like a nice. Dominique Ropion does some really nice stuff, and it's kind of interesting how well he's done some of that mass, like not mass market, more like quasi designer stuff like for Costume National and Chopard, and it's like it's really well made. If I found it at Sephora, it would be something that I would like recommend to anybody who is just shopping something to try. But it is, I don't know. I have like a lot of like actually like more real oud stuff now, and like weird, and it's an oud tobacco. I have so many tobacco fragrances. If anybody who's been following my channel for a while knows that I have tobacco out the wazoo all the time, and it's like this just wasn't getting any wear time, so out it goes.
You just reminded me to post a link to your channel, which I'll do. I think it's in the description, but definitely subscribe to Ryan's channel because he's got some really good in-depth videos on particular. Well, the last one I think was the tobacco. Or you've done a couple on tobacco, but yeah, definitely. You can post your YouTube handle if you want, Ryan, and but I'll put it in the description. All right, so yeah, Chopard Oud Oud Malaki. Yeah, Joel reminded me that they do other, you know, slash Malaki perfumes. You mentioned the leather one and there's a cedar one, but I think the oud one is the one that I keep seeing talked about. I have never seen it here in Australia, but I still want to smell it, even though you don't love it anymore. All right. So you're talking about Dominique Ropion. The next perfume that I'm going to talk about is from one of my favorite perfumers, and probably a lot of people's favorite perfumers. This one's from Jean-Claude Helena, and he did this for Hermes. And as some people know, I love quite a few Hermes perfumes, particularly ones that he's done, like Equipage Geranium. But the one that I used to own, and I got rid of for similar reasons to the Costume National Soul, and also similar reasons to why I fell out of love with L'Artisan Timbuktu. The one I used to own was Un Jardin sur le Nil. In case my pronunciation's terrible, I'll just type it in the comment. It was, at the time, I thought, especially for a summer warm weather perfume, really quite unique, and I put it in the same ballpark as something like Timbuktu, maybe perhaps a little bit greener, but I think they both what note they both shared in common was this sour kind of green mango note, and I suspect that it was that particular note because of the what it shared with Timbuktu that eventually sort of turned my nose off of it. But look, I must admit that there was also a possibility that the perfume itself went sour on me because I kind of seem to recall there was a couple of times I wore it and it suddenly didn't smell quite right to me, or didn't smell quite like it used to. So I'm not going to discount the possibility that something went wrong with the perfume itself. It was one that I initially, was enamored with, but towards towards the end, it just like I was not enjoying it on my skin anymore. There's going to be a couple I talk about in my list, Ryan, that I didn't love, like I didn't like smelling on me anymore, but I still enjoy smelling on other people. So I don't know if you'll have a similar thing. So have you tried Jardin Cyllenier?
I have, and
Yeah.
I'm also familiar with Timbuktu, which I recently gave a try again with to see if I got along with Timbuktu, and I have a similar sort of ambivalence to that for that very reason. I don't really get along with that particularly mango-y note in it, and I don't
Yeah.
know exactly what it is. It's something I always want to love because I really I I think the period of time that Elena was at Hermes is like kind of a really kind of golden era for Hermes as a fragrance house, and one of the better great all-time runs of any perfumer at any house. Certainly very few have had that like level of creative control that he did at that time, and I really respect
Yeah.
a lot of those things. But I did not, yeah, I didn't click with it. I didn't click with it, and I think it was Hedda who commented that there's a lot of like so much ISO-E in a lot of his things too. And I have to say, as much as I don't think it gets like, I think he's generally using ISO-E in interesting ways. I can't say he's not. It is the case that a lot of his compositions just kind of lean so heavily in that direction that it is
Like
kind of,
Terre d'Hermes, yeah.
yeah, that it's I don't know. Once you've kind of gotten used to ISO-E, and ISO-E is everywhere, even the nice versions of it tend to be a little ho hum, right? And that's kind of how I feel about that.
No,
Um,
that's fair. That's fair enough.
and I'm trying to think if there is something on my list right now where I didn't particularly like how it started to smell on me. And I'm not seeing that I have anything like that, but I do have something that I wore a lot of. I wore so much of this fragrance. And then I just, one day, it just started to feel like it kind of was falling apart on my
Yeah,
skin in a
yeah,
way that I couldn't. I don't know whether I was picking up something that I wasn't before, and then the fragrance was seeming imbalanced, or it was the conditions under which I was wearing it, because I had worn a lot of it and had liked it for a long time. And if you're go searching like my legacy of like base note posts and things like that, you will find me talking effusively about it. And that is the original Lalique pour Homme,
oh
Maurice.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is that the lion bottle?
yes, the
Yeah, yeah,
Lion bottle, which
yeah,
which I liked so much because it's kind of this nice when I originally fell in love with it, it was like a nice middle ground between the like very retro fougères of something like Bois de Portugal, which is
yeah.
like everybody loves it. I find that a little fusty. Maybe that's just my generation. I'm a little like my first fragrance I ever wore was Polo Blue, right? I came up in the
Yeah,
age of aquatics, right? So
yeah,
so a lot of the more strident like 1980s fougères are things that I appreciate but haven't really felt comfortable wearing. Lalique pour Homme was enough of a throwback, but it's also enough of a mid 90s like kind of like if you put like Bois de Portugal and Le Male together and you kind of got like something that was like a halfway mark between it kind of
ah,
works in that way. Um, but something about it in the base just kind of started to fall apart for me at some point when I was wearing it, and it lost a lot of the sparkle. I think Lalique does make lovely fragrances, but that fragrance just started to fall apart for me. And also, I think I started to find at the same time fragrances that did lavender a much more realistically, and I think that's my preference for lavender. I think there's a lot of things that kind of like streamline and round out lavender, and I'm less generally interested in that sort of streamlined lavender. I like my lavender spiky and like herbal. I've had lavender in gardens before and
yeah.
know that real smell, and I really kind of like when lavender skews in that direction. So that was another reason I
Well,
kind of.
you just reminded me because one of the perfumes that didn't make my list but almost did because I don't. I mean, I still like it, but because you were talking about lavender, one of the perfumes I used to own, and this might be sacrilege to some in the in the chat, was Caron's Pour Homme. And I kind of just got sick of that lavender. Like I didn't find it interesting enough. I was always there for the musky vanilla dry down, but not so much the lavender. But just you just reminded me that that was one of the perfumes I was almost gonna include on my list.
That's really interesting. You and I are. It's interesting. You and I are two very opposite people on the Caron Pour Homme, because I always liked the lavender and hated the thick musky vanilla that overtakes it. I was like, I want you to extend that sharp pointy lavender as much as possible, and then like the base of it was always what I just found a little too, I guess, a little too thick. I don't know. I don't know what it is. I have plenty of thick fragrances, but that was always too dense. But it's interesting that you and I are kind of like the opposites of it. But again, a Caron could have been on this list. I've owned it and
Yeah,
have gotten rid of it. So
yeah. All right, I think it's my turn. So this next perfume that I'm going to talk about it was reasonably early in me trying lots of perfumes, and believe it or not, because I'm not a fan of gourmands anymore, I there was a time when I loved gourmands, and one of the perfumes, because it came from one of my favorite houses and one of my favorite perfumers that I owned, was I don't know if you can see that, Noir Exquis. So I have this bottle is still here because I actually gave this to my daughter and she enjoys wearing it. But this used to be my bottle. So I thought at the time when I smelled that, it was Bertrand Duchefort, L'Artiste and Parfumeur, and it was a really interesting gourmand compared to the gourmands that were popular and out there at the time. I liked its like sort of burnt nuttiness, and I know after trying it, a lot of people said that Maison Margiela's By the Fireplace was similar to this perfume as well, and I did like that one less than I liked Noir Exquis, but ultimately this was really just a victim of me losing my taste for sweeter perfumes, and again. I think there was something about the smokiness there was something of a charred wood in with the nut accord or I can't even remember if it was praline or hazelnut, but it just stopped working for me on my skin, and I eventually. I think this is a victim also of the time I wanted to do a big declutter of perfume. And so this is the one where I was happy to give away to my daughter. I have had no desire to smell it again since. And this is like probably a couple of years ago now. And now I'm going to smell it. Yeah, it's definitely something. If I smelled this today, it's definitely something I would not even think about testing further or more. I just don't like this kind of perfume anymore.
I understand that. It's funny that you say that because that was one of the perfumes I decluttered a bit. I think I gave it.
Yeah.
I think I gave it to a family member, not unlike yourself. So I still think it's a nice entry in the category for what it is. Like if you're going to get that sort of like Tonka-y gourmand thing, like I would recommend that to people, anybody, like over By the Fireplace any day. Like it's just a nicer thing than that. But I wasn't enjoying really. The experience of wearing it in the same way. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of would like a version of it that was just like the roasted chestnut vibe without.
It's a chestnut.
Like,
yes, yeah.
Without like the Tonka fuzz around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that was my next one. I mean, there's not much else to say about that, apart from I did own many more L'Artisan perfumes, and I've kind of whittled that down to just I think I just now have a couple, which is Zonka and Sevilla Lob. They are the only two that I still own. So, yeah.
Okay. So then let's stick with that theme. So let's go with I guess go with another quasi gourmand that I stopped wearing. There was a period of time where I won't belabor this conversation because it will take us off track. But like,
no, go on.
Was looking for like a perfect vanilla for me, and there's so many vanilla perfumes, and I found so many of them like unwearable, but still something interesting about the note itself. And one of the ones that I had originally found that I really liked when I first sampled it, this was just after the Celine line had come out, which was getting a lot of hype with all the attention and care that line had received, and kind of like, and it is unusually well finessed for a line. And it was Black Tie, which I still stand by as being a very nice fragrance if you are looking for an Oris vanilla. But the problem is that I smelled it initially. I was like, this is really nice, and got a bottle after I had sampled it for a little bit. And I was like, this just feels really nice. It just feels really polished. But then it was just something I just so rarely reached for, because there were just so many things that I had that were just always a little bit more interesting than
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was. And it just kind of became a victim of just being another like nice, kind of slightly smoky Oris vanilla that was done as polished as that theme could be, but there was just like, there's no interesting signature thing in there to kind of like keep pulling me back to it. It just was kind of like the I don't know, it felt kind of like anonymous when I would wear it. And it was also
Yeah,
very
yeah.
soft. It was a very kind of intimate fragrance too, so it's not like it was good. And actually, Henna's asking whether I've smelled night clubbing, because I know you've smelled night clubbing and Henna has smelled night clubbing, and I've never tried night clubbing, and that's the one I really probably should as a tobacco person, given the cigarette vibes in it. But I have not tried night clubbing.
So I agree with everything you said about Black Tie. And I remember sampling, or I think most of the Celine line first time. And remember, I probably even posted a story or something like that saying that Black Tie was everything that you described, but not there was just not something that was making it special for me. And then when you smell something like night clubbing, you realize. I mean, they're not similar, but then night clubbing has that kind of uniqueness that Black Tie doesn't. But that might suit someone who's not after what night clubbing can offer. But yeah, I totally get what you mean.
I think a lot of some of these fragrances on this list are the things where I can very easily I have a soft spot for fragrances that just feel very polished. I like just polishedness unto itself, as like, so if I smell something and it just feels very complete as a perfume, that is a rare enough experience for me that I tend to like have an aha moment when I smell it. But that doesn't actually mean I'm going to connect with it personally. So a lot of these have led me astray in that way too. So like definitely the case with Black Tie.
Yeah, but I mean, it's pretty. I would put Black Tie maybe in the top three Celines that I smelled. So I kind of thought a lot of them were okay. Black Tie was nice. Night Clubbing was really good. I didn't mind Reptile either. Have you smelled that one?
I do like Reptile.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So that was one that was on your list. So you actually owned a bottle of Black Tie.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stick on the gourmand theme as well, because when when I got into this, what was really being hyped up at the time before when was Thierry Mugler's Amen series, the flankers, and the one that I fell in love with when I first smelled it was Pure Malt. I think that was probably one of the more popular ones, maybe Pure Havana, but Pure Malt. Like I can tell you that the first time I smelled that, I just had never smelled anything like it. I could smell the booziness of it. It was so deliciously sweet as well, and I actually still recognize the base of the original Amen in there, and like it was just something I thought, I probably, if I was doing a top 10 video at the time I owned it, it probably would have been like a top 10 fragrance for me. And again, like I'm probably sounding like a broken record, but that was just a victim of me, like slowly moving out of this saccharine perfume style that that kind of made me want to brush my teeth every time I wore something like that, and it eventually just got too much. There was just too much sweetness. There was too much booziness that over time I've realized is also wasn't even really a quite realistic malt whiskey accord either. It was this kind of hyper real thing that was just, I think pure malt was one of those perfumes where let's get all these elements but just overload everything, and that's what it felt like to me at the end when I couldn't wear it anymore. It made me feel a bit self-conscious when I did wear it towards the end, like it, like I appreciate that line purely because of what they, I think they were, Amen or Angel to be more precise, really started the whole, I think many people agree, it really started the whole gourmand thing off, and it's still going strong, but I just have moved past liking that.
I understand that completely. I mean, I never owned. I don't think I've owned any of the Amen series or flankers, but I remember smelling pure malt at the counter and just being like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I'm really kind of getting it. And that was early enough in my journey too, where there was a phase where I was like really into booziness in perfumes. I'm less so now. But there was a period where I was really excited about the possibility of that existing in a perfume. And kind of what you said about that, like, it's not a realistic booziness in that much the way that like the also much hyped and now also discontinued Pure Havane got talked about as being like tobacco, and there's not really a tobacco proper in there at all.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, I agree.
And so, but like these were both very sweet fragrances, and it's like I think one of the, I'm going to start talking about a few more interesting things on my list, but like but like there has been a general trend in my collection where I've just kind of like moved away from like what you might call conventional gourmands. I think there are a few that still are hanging out. I have Elena's Ombre Nargila, which I don't wear very much, but it's just so nice because he did it that I feel I would feel guilty if I got rid of it. It's just like it's like a nice thing, but like that sort of style just I don't know. I'm also in like the back half of my 30s now, staring down the barrel of 40 in the nearish years. So it also feels like I've kind of aged out of some of that a little bit. And I don't know if other people feel the same way too, but I just kind of feel like my days of wearing something that is like that kind of sweet and also very loud is like behind me. It just doesn't feel like it fits where I'm at in my life now.
Yeah, understandable. I think Cherie's wearing Ombre Nagil. Yeah, there you go. I think that's a nice one as well. Yeah.
It still holds up so well. It's one of those things that where there are a number of things that were kind of like hyped when I was getting into fragrances that like were the classics from like the run, and like that was one of them. Like Jardin,
yes.
Like all these ones, and like a lot of those actually going back to them, they still hold up really well. So you just went, so it's my turn.
Yes,
And so we'll change gears and get off the gourmand train from my end for just a minute.
Yeah.
So one of the ones that I have really fallen out of love with, and I have a bottle of it still because it was a gift and you can't really get it anymore, and I would feel terrible about selling it, was the original release of Tom Ford Ombre Leather 16, not the 2018 mass market re-release.
Is that in the signature line?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And it was a limited edition at that time, and it was only going to be in 2016. So I remember. So this was early in my fragrance journey, but the Nordstrom near me was having some sort of Tom Ford event, and I was married at the time, and my wife pulled me in, and we were sampling a lot of the stuff, and they were advertising Ombre Leather 16, which was coming out soon. And I had not really ever connected with Tuscan leather. Like, I had sampled the Tom Ford line, but Tuscan leather was always a little too. It was too aggressive. Like, I was just never going to wear it. But Ombre Leather 16, I immediately tried and just kind of loved. It's a plush, soft take on Tuscan leather, and I like it much better than the versions of Ombre Leather that are available now. I will say that. Like, I still think of the versions of this DNA, this is one of the better ones, and the reason it's one of the better ones is because it takes that suederol leather raspberry thing and then like drowns it in powdery violet, which is actually like really nice. I think at the time the idea was they were trying to make the leather accord like a feminine release. Ombre Leather 16 was kind of skewed towards in not like explicitly because it was private blend, but kind of like the feminine version of Tuscan leather, and it didn't really take off that way, and it still has kind of become associated with men anyway. But that version of it was much more floral feeling and powdery and soft. But that accord is everywhere, and it's still everywhere. L'Artisan Parfumeur just released their version of it again. Like, it's like the accord can't die, so it's
what's the L'Artisan called? Because I'm not aware of that. I'm curious because I used to like Ombre Leather 16 as well.
It is Cuir Grenat.
Okay.
By Christophe Renaud. And that if you smell it, it's almost like you just took the suederol leather accord in Tuscan leather and just that. And it's just that in raspberry in like a very minimalistic way. And it is. It's not unpleasant for what it's worth. Yeah. But it is the fact that accord has become kind of like everywhere as a leather fragrance. And then the other thing is I just fell out of love with that sort of linearity of it. So if I were to go on and put on Ombre Leather 16 right now, and I still do wear it sometimes, I'm just going to get tired of it after 90 minutes because it's the one thing and it's never anything else.
And it does, so does that imply that it's quite linear as well? It doesn't develop into anything else?
No, it doesn't develop into anything else.
Yeah,
it's like opens. Its opening is its best self, where you're getting this like leather and this powdery violet, and then it just kind of is like you're just slowly turning the volume down for hours and hours, and then it just kind of disappears. That's all it is. So it just, I don't know. It just it doesn't thrill me the way that it wowed me at the time because I wasn't as familiar with the other stuff that was out there. And it's still a nice fragrance though. Ombre Leather 16, it's nice. It's practically unobtainium though, so like those who are watching, like you don't need to go hunting for your bottle of Ombre Leather 16. There's a million fragrances in that ballpark now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the next perfume I'm gonna mention on this list is I think of more as a leather, regardless of what it's actually called. But this perfume, again, I got very early on. And when I had this perfume, I probably owned, I would say maybe no more than 10 bottles, which is like so tiny compared to what I own now. But the one that I used to love and no longer do is from Labo, and it is Patchouli 24. So I want to qualify this with saying I don't I guess I still like this perfume. I just couldn't wear it anymore. when I was naive, I smelled this perfume and liked what I smelled. Again, it was a case of it being like so different to anything else that I had smelled before. And I also, in some silly way, just assumed that other patchouli perfumes were going to smell like patchouli 24 as well, which is kind of just my naivety about their naming convention and that kind of thing. But really, for those of you who haven't smelled patchouli 24, I would say the main things that I always got was just this really smoky birch tar, underlying leather accord, which probably was because of that birch tar, birchy leather. There was a definite smokiness to it, and a lot of people, when they went to describe this perfume, always mentioned barbecue or grilled meat. I never really got that, but there's definitely a smokiness about it. And then this one thing I liked about it was this kind of vanilla in the base that sort of propped it all up. And this at the time, Annick Menardo was one of my favorite perfumers, and I still think this is still one of the best Labo perfumes. I just stopped loving it because I couldn't really handle more than 10 minutes of it on my skin by the end. And so, because it was also really, really strong perfume. And so I mean, it went from a love to I kind of just like you. Now you're interesting, but I don't want to spend too much time with you anymore. that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I've actually I had ordered a sample of the Labo Patchouli 24 and have been kind of spending a little bit of time with it recently to come back to it, because I really love smoky perfumes, right? I really love, like, if you've got a lot of birch tar in it, like, that's something that's I'm an easy mark for. And I really wanted to come back to it because when I'd sampled it, I was much earlier in my journey and hadn't really acquired a taste for that sort of level of smoke. And I think the concept is still really bold. What I'll say, wearing it recently, it didn't go to love for me, because I found the structure challenging, in the sense that and this is not just unique to this perfume, this is a common trend with a lot of fragrances that have a lot of smoke birch at the top.
Yeah.
Is you have this sort of gap between this like big cloud of birch, and then the rest of the fragrance just kind of sits down here, and it doesn't feel like there's a transition point. It just feels like there's a point at which the birchy leatheriness just stops, and then the rest of the fragrance exists. And there are very few fragrances that have kind of seamlessly bridged structurally that sort of transition where the birch edges into the other notes in a way that feels like blended. What I found kind of frustrating about Patchouli 24 is I wanted something in the middle that didn't exist, that was you're going to kind of help blend that into the vanilla a bit more. But it's a nice fragrance, actually. And if folks like it, I think Annick Menardo did it better when she kind of essentially remade it later on as Memory Motel by Une Nuit Nomade, or however.
Oh, yeah. Une Nuit Nomade, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so her Memory Motel is essentially the structure of Patchouli 24, but there's more in it. So it's a more complex, rounded version of Patchouli 24.
Yeah.
A little mustier in an appealing way for me.
I definitely want to smell that now.
Yeah, it's nice. It's really nice. So so if folks are interested in Patchouli 24, Menardo's second time at bat with that same concept is actually worth trying out, just because I think it does the idea with a little bit more nuance. So I guess if we're going to talk about that, I've got one that I know you've smelled this before, and so this is what I wore a decent amount of. I put a decent dent in this bottle, but I got rid of it. this year was Artiste Non Bon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is a really interesting, for those who haven't smelled Artiste, and Artiste can be hard to get, I think, internationally. It's easier to get if you're in the States, and I don't know what's going on with Artiste distribution, but I talked to people.
They definitely have distribution here in Australia. A few retailers have them.
Okay. Okay, that's good. And so Non Bon, for those who haven't tried it, it's a very predominantly, I would say, it's a leather perfume. It's a floral leather with like a lot of rose and leather, but like then there's a lot of spices going on in it. It's kind of meant to be a cacophony of spices based on the ad copy, where it's supposed to be like the hold of a ship transporting leather and coffee and tea and all this stuff together. So it's a kind of smoky floral leather, but what the base was the problem for me with that perfume, and this happens. I like the perfumer Rodrigo Flores Ru a lot, but there is a tendency with some of his perfumes to kind of like dry down to this sort of synthetic ambery materials in some of them. And Non Bon, it just felt like there was a lot of interesting stuff that's going on in that more like fuller mid and top. But by the time you got to the base, it just felt kind of like gloopy and kind of, I'm going to use the word coconutty, not in the sense that there's the coconut note, but like if folks who have smelled a lot of perfumes might recognize like this sort of like coconutty woodiness that's kind of sandalwood, but not a real sandalwood note.
Like amorous, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it just kind of always left me wanting more. And
Yeah.
at that point, and so. And also, it was also just a perfume that was a victim of the fact that I've gotten other smoky, spicy, leathery things that were always competing for attention. So it just kind of worked its way out that way. I think it's still an interesting fragrance. It's still kind of unusual for what it is, but I wasn't in love at a certain point in time.
Yeah. I definitely have tried. I think I might have done a video review of it, and I kind of sort of got everything you described. So that was never a love for me, but it's one of those perfumes where you totally understand that why it's popular. But if you just don't gel with everything in it, like if you don't love, I think I can understand why people like it so much, but I just didn't, sort of connect to it at all in any way. My next choice, Ryan and chat, I think is going to be the most controversial one, because this is like widely loved perfume, or probably more among men than women, I should say. It's a Base Notes darling. It's a Luca Turin 5-star perfume, and I've liked plenty of his 5-star perfumes, and I bought this particular one because of the review, and I did love it, and I've got a video review of it saying how much I loved it at the time. But after a while, this one here wasn't that it started to smell different on my skin, or I lost interest. I think I really just became bored of this perfume. I know I'm keeping you all in suspense, but I became bored of this perfume. And I also had another perfume in my collection that was similar ballpark, but I enjoyed more. And the perfume I'm talking about is Nicolai's New York Intense. I used to love it, and now I think it's a good perfume of its type. But I think that like, for instance, I much prefer Guerlain's Heritage to New York Intense. I think New York Intense became a little bit too scratchy for me compared to the base of Heritage, for instance. They're not the same perfume. They're just in a similar genre, and I'm here for the Guerlain every day. Except, and New York Intense is not, in my opinion, the masterpiece everybody thinks it is. That's all I'll say. And yes, mic drop, Rachel.
I so I never owned New York Intense. I sampled it, but I never owned it properly, and
Yeah.
I could not agree more with you about it. At the time, I did when I sampled it. At the time, I actually thought it was really sensational and had flirted with getting a bottle on and off over the years. But I kind of so maybe this will make sense to you, maybe it won't. But as I sampled more and more Nicolai perfumes, I found that her style tends to be very
I almost know what you're going to say.
no is very it's very like rich and accomplished in the sense that she builds out these very strong, like interesting accords, but they tend to be what's nice about something like Heritage, right, or the classic Guerlains is they really have these sort of like peaks and valleys as they develop on skin. Heritage does not smell the same at the beginning as it does at the end. It really does.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
It really is a different perfume. Whereas Nicolai's perfumes are like if you took the classical French style perfumery and made them very linear in the sense that they tend to be like, here's your accord and like, that's it. And I felt that way sometimes about New York Intense, where it was kind of like you got what you got, and then it wasn't going to take you on a journey anywhere. And that's not to say her perfumes aren't accomplished. Like, for example, one that I owned for a while, which was Cuir Cuba Intense, which is an interesting, very licoricey thing, floral thing. And it is really, really nice for what it is and very unusual. But it is the case that it just kind of like, again, just kind of stays in this very like similar bar. What you smell is kind of what you get at a certain point. And I kind of felt that way about New York Intense. Now I have never smelled, and I probably never will unless somebody is like generous about sending me a sample of something to try it, is the original New York that came out and originally got everybody pre-reformulation created such a stir. It probably would be wasted on me. So I in some ways too, because I just don't think it would be my favorite style. I don't think I would get what other folks would get out of it. But I don't know. I think it is. I don't know. New York Intense is not. I don't know. It's not all that as far as I'm concerned. So
well, I think Mickey Shoemaker makes a really good point, because this he's basically, or they've basically articulated what it is. That Heritage, even though it came out before New York Intense, still kind of feels contemporary, whereas when I smell New York Intense, that for some reason, and I hate saying things like this perfume's dated or old, but New York Intense hasn't aged as well as Heritage has, in my opinion. Anyway,
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. I mean, that was so. Remember when I first smelled it, this was a while ago, and I remember smelling it and being like, I had Heritage at the time. Heritage was one of the fragrances I connected with very early on in my fragrance journey. And I was like, this smells very mature. And I was not in a way that I was like hating on it, but it did feel very not of its time, in a way that I found like I was wearing Heritage with a lot of ease, whereas like I put on New York Intense and I was like, this doesn't feel as contemporary in the way that Heritage still does.
Yeah, agree. All right, so I think that was going to be. I've still got a few more, but I think that was going to be the most controversial one of the ones I had on my list. So, do you have any like that?
Most folks seem to be, going along with it, your opinion, just fine in the chat. So maybe maybe the moment for New York Intense has kind of passed. I kind of do feel that a little bit too. Like I feel like it was like there was a lot of excitement around it when it initially came out.
Yeah.
In part because it was also probably reviving something after the wave of formulations had already like gutted everything for everybody. So like New York Intense appearing on the scene was like, oh, the old days are back again. We have our vanguard of the glory days of fragrance. And I wonder if its star has faded a little bit. Speaking of stars that have faded, my next fragrance is from a house that I haven't really loved its journey lately, which is Amouage.
Okay.
And this fragrance was never one of the darlings, though, I will say. Like, this was never one of the hyped darlings, but it was one that I connected with very early on because, again, Amouage has many tobacco fragrances now, right? Like, Amouage has gone all in on, like, the tobacco thing now. But at the time that I was getting into Amouage, it hadn't made its current pivot. And the one that had tobacco in it, and as a tobacco fragrance lover, I sampled it, was Journey Man.
Okay.
Which is, if you have not smelled Journey Man, it's an interesting perfume, in the sense that it's kind of like a juniper-centric, gentlemanly fragrance that has been amped up with like a leather tobacco accord in it, and then some incense was added, and then they threw in Sichuan pepper to make things really edgy.
So what color bottle was a Journeyman? Because I kind of have this ID them on colors. They had a red bottle.
Yeah, like the candy apple red, like very red. And it was very easy to wear. And so there's this interesting period for Amouage where Amouage is like, you have old original Amouage with like the Gold Man, which is like very classic. Then you have its like Interlude Man jubilation days where it was like all the incensey like stuff that got people really excited. And then there was kind of this period of time which I thought was interesting, where I thought like Amouage was almost being like what Creed could have been during the same time, with like stuff like Beach Hut Man and all these things were like
Bracken Man,
very polished, nice kind of interpretations of more classic themes with an interesting spin, and you could always depend on it for quality. And Journey Man falls in that ballpark. It just at a certain point was just like, it just wasn't interesting enough for me, and I've generally felt the same way about Creed, and I'm not putting that down in any way. Like I'm not demeaning these fragrances in any way, but it's like the version of Journey Man that I would be wearing today is a version of Journey Man that had like a little bit more weirdness going on in it. And I don't know how else to put it other than that. Like, that's just kind of where I'm at in my journey. Speaking of Journey Man, but like it was a I don't know. It's a nice fragrance though.
Yeah. I actually, that's one of the Amouage that I haven't smelled. But yeah, I totally get when you were mentioned at the beginning, not crazy about where Amouage is going at the moment compared to where they came from. I'm totally with you, but that's probably a whole other video topic for both of us. So my next one, I'm almost 99%. Well, I'm 99% confident that probably no one in the chat actually liked this perfume ever, but there was a time when I not only liked this perfume, I owned a bottle of it, and what happened, and I'll explain the reason why I got rid of it eventually. Yes, it's Christian Dior Sauvage EDP. So the second the second version of Sauvage that was released, I never liked the original EDT, But when they released the first flanker of Sauvage, Eau de Parfum version, I tried it, and it seemed to me that for my nose, it was way less harsh than the original EDT. Like I kind of get why it's almost universally disliked by frag heads, right? Not definitely not your average perfume wearer, because clearly it sells millions of bottles, right? But and Sauvage, like I'm not gonna lie, I actually really did get complimented when I wore that perfume. I think it's got something to do with the fact that it just projects for miles, like and it's not to your average non-frag head person. It's obviously a pleasant smelling kind of thing. So the reason that I no longer own it and stopped wearing it, and this is probably the most boring and maybe probably snobbish reason I have, is that like I just smelled it everywhere, and I never felt like I was smelling different enough to everyone else. So that's one that was passed on to my son, and he happily wears Sauvage. And I tell you what, though, this I kind of get. I know it's not the popular opinion, but I kind of get why it's a popular perfume, because if when he sprays it on and walks out of his bedroom, like I can smell it, and I recognize it immediately. But my first instinct is not, oh, what the hell are you wearing? It's like, oh, you smell pretty good. Like, so yeah, it's an interesting one. I totally get that. I think, to be honest, I think it's a victim of its own popularity, and a lot like Bleu de Chanel is as well. Although people don't seem to have the hate for Bleu de Chanel that they have for Sauvage. And they always mention Ambroxan and all of that kind of thing. But, in isolation, I actually quite like Ambroxan as a raw material. Maybe it's overused in Sauvage, but it's not, when I smell Sauvage, I don't immediately go, oh my God, there's so much Ambroxan here. Like, I think people like to say the word Ambroxan a lot when they're complaining about it. But, yeah, but, I don't have it anymore. But I do like smelling it on my son when he wears it. Like I totally get why the youngsters love it.
It's so first off, I never thought that was going to be on your list. So we'll put that aside. But I will. Here's my hot take. I will take Sauvage any day over Bleu de Chanel, which is not on my list. But Bleu de Chanel, I hate. I actually hate Bleu de Chanel as a fragrance. I'm sorry, folks, if you love it. Bleu de Chanel is like you bottled the absence of personality. It is a nothing of a fragrance. It is absolutely nothing. At least Sauvage is a something. It is an atomically loud something, and I will take a something over a nothing any day. So. I'd
rather go to a party with Sauvage than Bleu de Chanel. Put it that way.
For sure. So that's an interesting one. I wish I had a good one to follow that up with. I'll go with this one. So this one I had actually messaged you that I had sold recently to make room for some other stuff that I brought in, and this is a very beloved, very hyped, very treasured fragrance. And this was the original release of Guerlain's L'Instant pour Homme Lidge. The very interesting original, like black, dark bottled release that is now...
this is the Eau de Toilette, right?
The Eau de Parfum.
Okay.
The original Eau de Parfum... extreme, not the current formulation, but that originally treasured, much hyped, ruined in reformulation, shadow of its former self, kind of like darling, that existed, and I had it, and it was very nice. It was very, what it is I like the eau de toilette fine. What was nice about the original Eau Extreme that I do want to say, I understand why people love it, is that it was an exceedingly good patchouli bomb for the time in particular, right? It was more so than the current version is, which skews more gourmand. The original just loads on the patchouli in a lot of ways, but it does so in a very Guerlain way. It's not like Borneo patchouli where it's like all kind of weird and funky. It's patchouli that is like overdosed, but is the most mannered version of itself in a Guerlain way, and I appreciated it. But sampling, I was with you and Henna, and then revisiting Borneo again. I was like,
Yeah.
this is Borneo is in another league for me. That was just kind of like it just kind of like made a decision for me in that moment. But also the other thing was that the thing about Lidge that I don't love, and this is still true of the current versions, is there is a citrus opening that
Lemon,
is
yeah.
very much of the time. And I
Yeah.
don't know how else to describe it, because the citrus note is not, it opens with citrus, but it's not a realistic citrus. It's a
No.
citrus that has been extended, and I feel like it lets the fragrance down. I think like if it was a more realistic, sharp burst of citrus that then went away, I think all versions of L'Instant would feel a little bit more timeless. But it feels very like early 2000s in the way that sort of like synthetic citrus just kind of hangs out and hangs around. And I think it lets the fragrance down a little bit. It's very easy. I agree. It's very easy to like, though. It is. I wore, if you actually looked at my wears as I've recorded them, I wore quite a bit.
And you can understand as well, Ryan, that when they were released, there was probably nothing like them on the market. So you can understand why they were probably critically loved, just from their uniqueness. I mean, to me, they don't smell bad, but like I actually smelled the original Eau de Toilette Lidge recently, and it was nice enough. But I was thinking, I was just trying to think. I guess in my mind, I was just thinking, how come this is so popular? So I just didn't get it. I think it was a case of me not getting it in that particular case.
I understand that. I still have the Eau de Toilette, and the reason I have the Eau de Toilette around is because I wore enough of it that it's like it's one of those things that's kind of like in my fragrance collection to smell occasionally and like connect with an earlier version of myself. The Eau de Toilette we're talking about. We've moved on from Eau Extreme. The Eau de Toilette I had a longer relationship
Yeah.
with. The Eau de Toilette, but the reason I keep it is really just because my collection skews so weird now that I need to have at least like one or two fragrances that are like an anytime fragrance that are just kind of
Yeah.
like my like, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I can grab it at a glance and like know that it's going to be relatively inoffensive for everybody around me and not be annoying to me. And that fragrance kind of fits the bill, but that's kind of a backhanded compliment to it anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Uh, I just had a look at what was next on my list because I had to remind myself that, and I'm now revisiting this oud vanilla craze that was happening for a while, if it's not still happening. The next perfume that I am going to mention that I really liked, I don't know if I ever loved it, but I had seriously considered getting a bottle of this because I had travel spray that I used up, was from Maison Francis Kurkdjian, and no, it's not Baccarat Rouge because I've always hated that perfume. This one was Oud Satin Mood. Now, this for me, this perfume, like I was blown away by how, first of all, by how strong the notes were. It's the first kind of perfume that had a very strong rose note, that I kind of really liked, and probably not quite in the style of oud rose that I prefer, like these darker, more less sweet oud rose. I think what ruined Oud Satin Mood for me eventually was mainly that huge, strong vanilla note. I ended up finding it just too sweet, and I also started to interpret that oud as very synthetic as well. I'm pretty sure there's no real natural oud being used in that perfume, but I I kind of hesitate to describe perfumes as synthetic because what does that mean? But with Oud Satin Mood, like it kind of, the best way to describe it was none of it felt natural in any way to me. The rose didn't feel natural, that vanilla didn't feel natural, and definitely that oud aspect didn't either. And that was one of the few perfumes that, after a while of wearing, I just started to get, I literally started to get headaches from wearing it. It's just so loud and invasive. I felt like it was attacking my soul by the end, and I needed to have an exorcism, which I did. So I definitely got rid of my travel spray, and I never looked back.
I understand that because I have flirted on and off with getting Oud Satin Mood, but I know that I would fall out of love with it. It's one of those things where it's like, it's kind of it's interesting. The rose oud category is now so ubiquitous. It's so ubiquitous that it's really hard to find any that stand out. Even the ones that like used to be beloved. And I say used to be because they just don't get mentioned as much anymore because there's just so many oud roses. Like there's a new one every other week.
Yeah.
Like nobody really talks up Oud Ispahan and Oud Palau anymore like they used to get a lot of love. And those are nice fragrances for what it's worth. If you still love
They are
Oud Palau, they're very nice.
yeah.
But that whole category has gotten really oversaturated. And MFK's fragrances, and I say this both as a compliment and as a bit of a complaint, is that Kirkjan is very focused on modern materials, and I think he's very smart with modern materials, and he can find very interesting things. As much as I hate Baccarat Rouge 540 with you,
Yeah.
before it was copied relentlessly, it was a very novel approach to the candy floss materials. Like you could see conceptually how it was created as a limited edition Baccarat Rouge fragrance, how it was meant to kind of evoke the experience of the red crystal there. It's kind of, he's very talented with it, but it's very hard to get excited about synthetic oud accords these days because they're just so everywhere, and it takes a lot of work to make them interesting now at this point. And I feel like, so one that I tried that's in this vein, and this isn't on my list at all. I don't know if you smelled it. Have you smelled Armani Privé Oud Royal?
No.
Again, it's not adjacent to Satin Mood, but it is. I kind of liked it when I smelled it, but I was like, I know I'm going to get bored of it. What's nice is it wasn't like an oud rose; it was more like an oud sandalwood, which is nice enough. But it's like I don't know. It's hard to get excited about this. And I say this as somebody who has a lot of like oud things in his fragrance collection, not even like the Ensar oud like curated oud stuff. I have just a lot of oud things in my collection, but like something that is almost like minimalistically synth oud at this point is really hard to get excited about.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's not it's not something when I happen to look at a new release and look at note pyramids just to get an idea of what it might be like. It's certainly something that as soon as I see an oud note, like I know I shouldn't. I should smell it regardless, but like I kind of go, oh, okay, like maybe pass. But yeah,
Okay. So I'll get this one out of the way because I doubt anyone here has smelled this fragrance because
yeah,
it was very limited release. But I'll talk more about why I got rid of it. So there was a fragrance called Strength by Zegna. They had a collection called Elements of Man, which was actually a pretty interesting collection. One of those fragrances is still in my collection that I love very much. But Strength was their sort of smoky, dark tobacco
okay,
kind of take it was an oud tobacco with like piney tones and smoke. So if that sounds really kind of like dark, it was. But there was also it also kind of bridged the gap between what you might call like a dark tarry tobacco kind of thing and like a tobacco vanille thing because there's also honey in it, so like a very like wild, sticky kind of resinous honey thing going in there, and then apricot. And
okay,
I have realized I just can't do apricot. If I see
yeah, yeah,
apricot in a fragrance, that note kills a fragrance stone dead for me. There was another fragrance I sampled recently, which was Bertrand Duchafour's Cafe Tabac for I don't know how you say this, 80s de Venustas or however you say
yeah.
that, but Cafe Tabac, and it just had that apricot thing coming in heavy, and I can't do it. I can't do it. The smell of that sort of like dried apricot, something about that in particular. I love dried fruits as a category, like more like the darker dried fruits, but like something about apricot in particular is just really profoundly off-putting to me.
Yeah. Do you ever pick up uh, apricot in osmanthus when there's heavy osmanthus in perfumes?
Not the kind of dried apricot, I would say.
Ah, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
more if it's like a juicy kind of like fruity thing, that's a little bit different. I still don't do. There's not a lot in my collection that I would call particularly like fruity in that way, but I don't react to osmanthus that way. But then again, I don't
Yeah,
think I own anything that's particularly osmanthus heavy.
yeah,
So
yeah,
draw your
yeah.
own conclusions.
Fair enough. Now, my next perfume, and I'd never heard of that Xenia, but my next perfume, Ryan, you probably, I know that you like your whiskey. You're a little bit of an aficionado, whereas the reason that okay, so I'll just straight out say that this next perfume on my list is from Nasomatto, and it's the quite popular Baraonda. I think that's how I pronounce it, Baraonda. And so I was initially attracted to this perfume because people talked about this quite realistic, really peaty malt whiskey accord that it had. And me not being a whiskey drinker, although I know what whiskey, like I'm familiar with the smell of what whiskey's supposed to be like. When I first smelled Baraonda, I thought, oh wow, this is really quite realistic. And I mean, it may well be. That's why I'm seeing. I want to see what your opinion is, but and I thought, oh wow, this is like back then. I was into the boozy perfumes for the same reason I was enjoying pure malt. Baraonda seemed like next level pure malt without all that sweetness. Like it was such a realistic, to me, whiskey accord. But then the reason I stopped liking that perfume was I realized that I kind of stopped wanting to smell like something else that existed. Like I wanted perfume to be you no, you couldn't replicate the smell of your perfume anywhere else, right? So I started to kind of steer away from single note soliflor type perfumes, even though they had more than one note, but they mainly smelled of one thing. Yeah, so Nasomatto Baraonda was that perfume for me. So what did you ever smell it, and what did you think of its whiskey accord?
I have so somebody earlier in the chat said at some point, you guys are tiptoeing around the line of hate. I want hate.
Oh, okay. There you go.
And so
I saved my last one for the hate too, by the way.
yeah, I despise Baraonda. I hate that fragrance viscerally, and I hated it from the moment I first smelled it, because I got it because I was pursuing boozy fragrances, something with a whiskey note. It seemed like an easy fit for me. Everybody acclaimed it. I tried my sample of that, and few things made me profoundly kind of stick in a way that I had to wash something off, and that fragrance was one of them. And
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it is, because it's not the smell of. I think there is a realistic booziness in it, but I think what I actually reacted badly to is the combination of that booziness with the ambrette and the
Yes.
musk. It creates this weird unnatural combination. It's not like just smelling a glass of whiskey, which is actually a little bit more sharp and woody and pointed. Something about the ambrette element just really, I don't know, the sweet floral quality of it just really, really didn't work for me. I think, to the extent, I don't own many what I would call truly boozy fragrances anymore in the true accurate sense of the word. The things that I would call boozy in my fragrances are more like boozy richness as an abstraction, but realistic booziness, I don't think it really works in a lot of perfumes unless you're putting it with really just kind of really woody tones. There are fragrances I've thought worked okay where they did the sort of whiskey thing, but it was whiskey and tree bark kind of being the concept. And that to me feels like a family I understand, the whiskey barrel concept, but the ambrette stuff just really made my stomach churn.
Yeah, I'm glad that you agree, because to me it started towards the end. That combination started just to make me, yeah, exactly. There was this. Sorry, I meant this one here. Like a drunk with BO. I think I seem to recall, and I could be correct. Please, anyone who knows, correct me. That I think some of the inspiration of that particular perfume for the perfumer Alessandro Gottieri wasn't so much about the whiskey accord, but also I'm going to get this wrong, but it had something to do with being drunk, maybe, and so he didn't necessarily set out to create something that was supposed to smell pleasant. But yeah, I think it stopped working for me completely. All right, have you got one more left, or?
I do.
Okay, cool. So we're on track. We've both got one left. Cool.
One left.
I'm looking forward to hearing this.
This one, I think if Henna was here, she would be mad at me for this one. Because it's all things considered, this is a very good fragrance. I have nothing bad to say about it. It was one of those fragrances that I fell out of love with just because I had an alternative that I think was a lot better. And sometimes that is the case. You find one fragrance, you think it's really interesting, and then eventually you come across another fragrance, and you're like, this is the thing I liked. This has everything I liked in that other fragrance, but is just a better experience. And so this is the fragrance I'm about to mention is Zoologist Camel, which is, I think, a very nice smoky leather with dried fruits, ostensibly a little bit of oud and rose, but isn't really like a rose oud in any conventional way. It's really a smoky leather with the dried fruit effect, and the dried fruit notes are very pleasant to me, and I like that. And it also has some like animalic tones, which are very nice. But the fragrance that took its place in my heart is a fragrance I've just been wearing a whole lot, and that is L'Artisan Parfumeur's
Oud. Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is that concept done about as well as I think it can be. It's so nice, and Oud has that wonderful cumin spice in it that is like, I don't know, it wears like a dream. I wear it all the time. It's the height of summer, and I'll still wear Oud.
Yeah.
The cumin glows. I just don't think Zoologist Camel really had the same level of refinement. It's a little bit rougher intentionally. I think that's kind of sometimes the zoologist aesthetic, but it just was not pulling my heartstrings anymore.
No, and I totally get the comparison with Oud because I'm the same. I didn't not like Camel. I thought it was good, but like when I smelled Camel, I immediately thought of Oud, and at the time I don't own Oud anymore, but I never it was just kind of not enough of a love for me to keep. But I always preferred Oud to Camel. It's like I thought, well, I mean, I've already got a better version of Camel, so I don't need it as well. Okay, interesting. It is animalic, Cherie. Like I find that the cumin in Oud is a better dirty note than what they used in Camel. I think there was a bit of civet in Camel from memory, and also the dried fruits in Oud I liked a bit more than how they used it in Camel as well.
It's all a little heavier in Camel, though. I want to say the context in which I got introduced to Camel was actually very interesting, and this is actually worth mentioning as an anecdote, because I think this kind of event doesn't happen a lot of the time. But if you are in the United States, there is a wonderful perfume shop dedicated to independent perfumery in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, called Pickwick Mercantile. Pickwick's Mercantile is part of a museum there, and they have a restaurant associated with them too. And so they have, in the past few years, have done a few different dinners where they actually pair fragrance with the courses. So they will have you smell one of the fragrances from their collection, and it's meant to complement the course. And one of the fragrances they had actually selected during the course of that meal was Zoologist Camel, which was actually a very interesting thing to smell alongside food. And I'm trying to remember exactly what food they paired it with. But I fell in love with it in that moment. And obviously during that event, they were like selling perfume. I bought the bottle of Camel there. So it was a nice association for me from the event. And actually it was a very cool event. I think that would be a cool experience for anybody to attend if they're still doing that. And if you have the opportunity to visit Pickwick's Mercantile, it's one of the best shops for like independent perfumery in the United States. Really lovely.
Did you say it was in New Hampshire, Ryan?
Yes, New Hampshire, up in Portsmouth.
Okay. All right. This is my final one, and this is I know Bilbo was saying there should be more hate. I think of the 10 that I'm talking about for this stream, I'm happy to say, not happy, but I can say that I think that I do kind of hate this perfume now. The irony of this all is that when I blind bought this perfume, and I initially loved it, and I would never refer to myself as an influencer, but when I did a review of this perfume on my channel, I'm pretty sure a few people told me that they were convinced to try it or buy it, even based on my review. And I still stand by what I said in my review at the time. But things change. And the perfume that I can say that I hate now that I once actually loved is Ganymede by Marc-Antoine Barrois, right? I think it was purely a case of smelling that perfume initially. Remember, it was a blind buy. Maybe subconsciously I was swayed by that as well. But it did feel like unique, and I was kind of seduced by that and how strong it was. I guess like it really just sort of kind of there was this moment in time when Ganymede seemed like there was nothing else in my whole collection that was like it, from a scent and performance profile. But over time, I didn't actually own it for very long. Maybe I had it for 6 months, and it was done. Like I started to dislike it on my skin. It went sour, and now I put it up there with Baccarat Rouge. I mean, I think Ganymede was one of the perfumes that started getting clones of it like earlier than any other perfume I'd heard of, and now I kind of smell that profile out on the street in the wild. I don't think they're all Ganymede, but they all smell like Ganymede. So yeah, I really, I can say I hate it. I really need to revisit my old reviews and maybe do re-reviews of some perfumes, to be honest.
That's why so many of
Ganymedes.
that's why so many of my old videos are actually like hidden now. It's just because I don't stand behind a lot of the stuff in them. The Ganymede I never liked, I have to say, but I sampled it after a period after it had I guess the wave had crested for the Ganymede hype. I will say in general, and I don't know how you feel about it, but I don't really quite connect with the style of perfumery that Quentin Bish really does in a lot of his creations. And I don't know, Ganymede is, I don't know, it's like, so it's one of those smells that is very abstract.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not made for that level of abstraction in perfume, the way other people are, and I appreciate that people are. I don't think abstraction in perfume is a bad thing.
No, no, not at all.
Just like I don't think a Rothko painting is a bad thing. I actually quite like Rothko's art. It's I don't know. I don't have as much to hold on to it, and I found the smell, because it is so abstract, very, very artificial, in a way that I couldn't quite reconcile myself to. So
Yeah.
give it flowers.
Yeah, Mika, I did I sang its praises when I got it. The reason it's on this list is purely because it fit the profile of this topic. I loved it, and now I don't at all.
It happens. I'm trying
Yeah.
to think if there are things, because I was looking at the list and there was plenty of stuff that I didn't put into my list of 10 that were things that I had picked up because it was like being talked about or things like that, and then hadn't connected with for whatever reason. But I really wanted to stick to things that I felt like I had really done
Yeah.
180 on. But I'm struggling to remember anything that was directly like hyped in that way. I think I have definitely bought things at the point of release because I was so curious about them in the advance up to their release that I got like right away. And some of those I have liked, and some of those I haven't. One that I didn't like, if we're talking about things that we just kind of didn't like because it's on topic, was I bought when it released Serge Lutens Écrins de Fumée, which I thought was going to be a slam dunk. Sheldrake doing a boozy tobacco for Serge Lutens. Oh, how could it
How could
possibly,
it go wrong?
how could it go wrong? And I just don't, I just don't, it's just kind of a meh perfume for
Yeah.
me.
I haven't smelled that one. But I wanted to ask you,
Mhm.
I know I haven't smelled this, funnily enough, even though I have access to essential parfums. But have you smelt Bois Imperial? Because
Yes.
I know that people talk about similarities to Ganymede, and I know some people actually think that's a better perfume. Do you have any opinion on that?
I couldn't compare the two
No.
side by side because I've smelled them pretty far apart from each other. I
Yeah.
will say I did not have the same reaction to Bois Imperial that I did to Ganymede. So I guess I would say I liked Bois Imperial more. It is still a very much a Quentin Bish style thing. But Bois Imperial is a little bit more woody in feeling as
Okay.
opposed to like the very mineral
Yeah.
feeling of Ganymede. So I think that skews nicer. But I'm also struggling to remember my exact response with it. It was one of those things that I kind of like smelled and I was like, this isn't going to be something I'm going to connect with. I can put this sample away and yeah, David. It had, you think the guy who did Chergy and why am I blanking on the tobacco perfume you love so much that he did
Fumari took.
Fumare Turk, like completing that trilogy, so to speak, would be a slam dunk. And it was really kind of not um Imperial. Very linear. There's a lot. It's interesting that Micah says Bois Imperial very linear pencil shadings. That is something that I have gotten very tired of in perfumes. Is like
Yeah.
perfumes lean on the pencil shading cedar effect. That feels like that's seen its run.
I, I I agree with Acre de Fumée. I remember when something was first posted about it, I went to look at the note pyramid and I was exactly like you, got very excited about smelling it, and I had the same reaction. There, like whereas the whereas something like La Couche de Diablo was the opposite. For some reason, I never got excited about that when I first smelled it, but then I ended up smelling it in a blind sample, and I liked it from then. Then when I found out it was La Couche de Diable, I thought, wow, this is actually really good. Probably not talked about enough Serge Lutens perfume, I think.
Yeah. So La Couche du Diablo is something I never would have sampled on my own. So there was this very brief period of like 2 weeks where Serge Lutens had pulled out of America, and
Yeah,
somehow
yeah.
Serge Lutens fragrances were going to TJ Maxx and Marshalls. And
Oh, wow.
I was in TJ Maxx one day, and I saw the full 100 ml bottle of La Couche du Diable in the men's section for 19.99 US dollars.
What?
$20. I got my bottle of La Couche du Diable. It is the best deal I've ever had on a fragrance. I will never see that deal again.
Oh,
I also got
wow.
La Fille de Berlin for the same price. And I had not smelled it before, and I wore it, and that shows routinely up in my top 10 list. I love that fragrance and connect with that on like a deep. Um,
That's the rose. That's the rose one, isn't it?
La Fille de Berlin, I love. That's
Oh,
probably
yeah, yeah,
my favorite rose soliflor, but La Couche de
yeah,
Diable is the one that's like
yeah,
is
yeah.
me, like smoky labdanum
Labdanum,
goodness.
yeah.
Yeah, that is. I have really I have really turned a corner on Serge Lutens these days, where I'm almost kind of like a fanboy now in a way
Yeah.
that I never was before. That is really kind of interesting to me because, like, at the beginning of my journey, if you ask me about Serge Lutens, I'd be like, yeah, they're interesting. I don't really connect with them, and I've kind of done a whole 180 on that line, and Sheldrake's style in particular. Serge Noir, I have to say, I have not acquired the love for. I don't know what you think of Serge Noir.
Well, Serge Noir could have easily have been one of my list, but it's not. I always liked Serge Noir and saw something in it that almost no one else did. For some reason, I never smelled Serge Noir and smelled all the negative things that people talked about. To me, it was always this like really fruity, the fruity aspect of clove. Like clove was there, but it all. I mean, I'll never forget that the first time I smelled Serge Noir was a blind smell, so I didn't know I was smelling Serge Noir, and my very first instinct when I smelled Serge Noir for the first time was I smelled juicy fruit chewing gum. That's what it reminded me of, and that's why I was able to wear it and not be bothered by anything about it. But in the end, I think I just got kind of a little bit bored with Serge Noir. I'm with you. I'm like, you know how people are Frederic Malle enthusiasts, fanboys. I'm that guy with Serge Lutens. If I had to choose between those two brands based on my experience with them, always Serge every day, every minute.
Oh, any day of the week, I would take Serge Lutens over Malt. The lineup is like, obviously I don't connect with every Serge Lutens fragrance that's ever been released, even the Sheldrake classics, but there's just so much there, so much goodness. Even something as simple as Fleur d'Oranger, which is just an orange blossom soliflor, but is probably the best orange blossom soliflor around. It is just I don't know. Serge Lutens, it's such a shame that they pulled out of America. It really is, because I really wish they could have succeeded here. I don't think they have American sensibilities in any way, shape, or form. It's just not culturally a fit for here. But I never. I mean, you can see my video on Mall if you want, folks. But like, I never emotionally connected with Mall.
I in no way am saying that all the Frederic Malle I've smelled. To me, they do smell like really good perfumes, but I have no emotional connection to them. I guess I don't feel like I'm part of the Frederic Malle club, whereas Serge speaks to my soul in a way that Frederic doesn't.
I think part of that too is also just they are very different aesthetically in the directions they go, and obviously Serge Lutens is also, despite Serge's name being on the house, it's really like a Christopher Sheldrake brand, and that sensibility is so so unique that it's hard to compare the houses. Mall is very much like very refined concepts. Serge Lutens is sometimes refined is not the word that comes to mind.
No.
Like Borneo, which I am just so head over heels in love with these days now that I've gotten that in my collection, and is just so thrilling to me. But it's not my idea of a refined perfume.
No.
It's just kind of really robust, and I think that is the case with a lot of the Sheldrake things. I just love the gusto that Serge has.
But having said all that, if Frederic Malle happened to be able to get Christopher Sheldrake to put his name on a perfume, I would be one of the first to try and smell it. I'm just so curious to see what he'd come up with under the Frederic Malle, brief.
Their day.
Okay. All right. Well, I did need to cap this stream at 2 hours, and we've got 10 minutes left. So I might take this opportunity. First of all, thank you, Ryan. But I might take this opportunity to see if anyone wanted to ask any questions to either of us. But I've been enjoying everyone's comments in the chat, even Bilbo's. So I I'll just show a couple. Yeah, that's a good point, David. Surge is the best creative directed house. Yeah.
I think so. I mean I think you could have made the case that if L'Artisan Parfumeur hadn't like gutted its lineup around the time that it was acquired, L'Artisan Parfumeur's run in the 2010s up into the early 2010s was the equal of what Luton was doing with when you had Jacques Betty and Duchefort at the height of their powers. I would say that those two at the height of their game versus Sheldrake, there's not a clear horse in leading that race. But I think L'Artisan discontinuing a lot of their stuff is hard. And Luton has discontinued a lot of stuff too, but it is the case that the core lineup has remained intact.
I am going to defer to you on this question, Ryan, because to be honest, I actually I'm not really that aware of what's coming out in 2024, if that's what the question refers to.
There's a new tower on the way that people are talking about. If you are an Andy Tower fan, I generally am, though. I'm pulling up my base notes wardrobe because I have bought some things from this past year, and I'm trying to remember what I actually got that was 2024. Okay, so I have two fragrances from this year. One of them I sampled with Pep at Essence, and is the most ridiculous fragrance in my collection, which is Filippo Sorcinelli's Notre Dame Notte di Natale, which is this giant gold hand reliquary style perfume. That's cool if you really like incensey stuff. But the one that is coming out that I do want to say is worth looking for if you are in America. Unfortunately, they don't ship internationally. Is this September? Clandestine Laboratories is going to be releasing its fragrance Lost in Time in wide release, which I got the limited release originally. Lost in Time is one of the wildest independent takes on a tobacco perfume that I've ever smelled. And I've sampled a lot of tobacco stuff. It is kind of like a full-throated fist in the face of like tobacco and a very like musty, like woodsy cedar together, and very loud nuclear production, but really cool if that sounds like it's up your alley. So I'll just say that's something to look forward to in September.
I think I have a problem. I would have a problem sampling clandestine. I'm not sure if they're sending stuff outside of the US at the moment, but I have wanted to smell them for a long time.
They're an interesting full disclosure, I chat with Mark Sage, who is the producer of Clandestine Laboratories, like a lot. He and I kind of go back and forth a lot. So I'm friendly with him, so that I have affection for the house on that level. But I did originally encounter the house kind of out of the blue, sampling things blind. I like the style of that house because it's very kind of in the same way that Andy Tower has a very distinct style that you can't really say anybody else has in the way he structures perfumes. Mark Sage has kind of like the Sage way of building a perfume, and you can't really say anybody else is doing that exact kind of thing, even if you love it or you hate it. Like, it's just very different, and that's one reason I keep kind of enjoying what's going on there.
I'll see if I can. I'll see if I can get some stuff. I wanted to answer flavor source Rachel's question there. Up until the last day or so, I had nothing on my radar in terms of next bottle to buy at all. But I, I think there's been a couple of mentions in conversations I've had of Guerlain's Angelique Noir, and I remembered how much I loved my sample of it and how it didn't make sense that I loved this perfume so much because it was basically just a really, I mean, albeit a really beautiful vanilla, but I loved the angelica, the greenness of it in the opening and in combination with the vanilla. So, maybe if I can, I might have to sell some bottles and save up because they are fucking expensive these days. Those Guerlains, or maybe I can see if I can find a decant of it and satisfy myself for a while. But yeah, that's kind of on my radar. What about you, Ryan?
I kind of gutted a good 30% of my collection and rotated some new things in. So I think I am set for the year. If really, that's not to say I won't. Let's be realistic. There will be some new bottle,
Yeah.
right? But it is. I am actively trying not to pay attention to any forthcoming releases or trying to build a wish list of any kind right now. I will say. Let me just look this up. I have to look up this one fragrance, and it's very hard for me to pronounce it because it's in French, and it
Okay.
always is. What is it called? I can't. I'm not going to be able to find it. Anyway, it was a lovely labdanum-based fragrance that I can't remember the name of right now because it's in French, but it was very beautiful and something like that. Or I would also say I've been thinking of I don't know how you pronounce it well in French. Épicé by Miskeo. Épice.
Oh, Épice. Yeah, Épice.
Épice by Miskeo has been. I've gone through my sample of that and
Yeah.
am now kind of like that. I loved it enough to potentially get a bottle of that.
Ah, cool. That's good to hear. Um, all right. I think, unfortunately, I do have to go to have domestic commitment to take care of. But Ryan, it's been awesome. Let's do this again. Obviously, I'm happy. Like we do it on each other's channels. We can take turns. And we can invite other people if you want. But it was a great. I found it a great topic to think about because I probably had a lot, but not so much. Not so much that like there's probably a lot of bottles that I used to own that I still like, but I just didn't need a bottle of. But made me think about what I loved and then didn't like anymore. Thank you to everyone in the chat who contributed, and it's been very fun to read as we've been chatting. We'll talk soon, Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Pep. And thank you, everybody. It has been a great stream.
Thanks so much. Okay, I sorry I have to go. Otherwise, we would chat a bit longer, but I do have to go. So sorry, guys. Talk to you all soon and enjoy. See you guys.